It's been said that a car's weakest part is the nut holding the steering wheel. As long as there have been cars on the road, there have been drivers, many of whom have discovered the reality of being unprepared for the road ahead. And sadly, there have been many accidents and mishaps. But did you know that there was once a time when you didn't need to take any kind of special test to drive a vehicle on the road? That's right, at no point did you need to prove that you had the necessary skill and discipline to get behind the wheel. It seems crazy to think, but it wasn't until 1935 that a mandatory test was introduced, decades after the introduction of these newfangled horseless carriages. And from that moment, the barrier to experiencing the unbridled joy and freedom of the open road was no longer merely financial. Now you had to prove yourself. As a child of the 1980s, growing up on a diet of American pop culture, Hollywood made it perfectly clear to me that becoming a driver was a rite of passage and would unlock all of the possibilities and promises of a fulfilling life. I couldn't wait to pass my test, get out there, and simply drive, with, as Chuck Berry put it, no particular place to go. In this video, I'm going to look back on a funny movie I first saw on Sky Movies back in the early 90s. I do enjoy rewatching it now and then, as it brings back warm memories of a more innocent time in my life. I'm certainly not the first to cover this particular movie, but I do so not only from my perspective as a Brit, but also as someone who was impacted by its central theme. I'm Stuart McLachlan, otherwise known as That Guy in the Firebird, and I invite you to buckle up and sit back for my review of this hilarious, ridiculous, and quintessentially 80s classic, Licence to Drive. There's a certain charm to 1980s teen comedies, and Licence to Drive stands as a perfect time capsule for the era, a breezy, neon-lit romp that blends teenage rebellion with vehicular chaos. Directed by Greg Beeman in his feature film debut and written by Neil Tolkien, the movie is a high-octane comedy, fueled by equal parts nostalgia, absurdity, and just the right amount of teenage angst. Starring the dynamic two Corys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, this film takes a simple premise. What happens when you drive without a license, and steers it into absolute mayhem? Corey Haim plays Les Anderson, a typical American teenager with a mop of hair, an infectious smile, and a desperate need to impress the prettiest girl at school. Haim was fresh off the success of The Lost Boys, where he'd also teamed up with Corey Feldman, creating one of the most iconic 80s duos. Feldman's character in this film, Dean, is the kind of friend your parents always warn you about. Brash, bad at advice, and full of chaotic energy. Heather Graham's role as Mercedes Lane, yes, that's really her name, would kickstart a career that later included Boogie Nights, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, and The Hangover. Meanwhile, Carol Kane and Richard Masur, both beloved for their comedic chops, play Les's concerned but wildly over-the-top parents. Masur's stint in My Girl and Kane's run on Taxi lend the movie a touch of veteran credibility amidst the youthful chaos. Behind the camera, Greg Beeman would go on to direct several TV hits, including Smallville and Heroes, but Licence to Drive is where he cut his teeth, clearly reveling in the controlled chaos of teenage dreams and disaster. The premise of this movie is very simple. Les, who clearly has more confidence than common sense, spectacularly fails his driving test, but decides to borrow his grandfather's car anyway while his parents are sleeping and oblivious. Why? Because nothing, neither the DMV nor logic, will stand between him and impressing his dream girl, Mercedes. Accordingly, shenanigans ensue, including car chases, getting caught in the middle of a riot, a drunk girl in the trunk, and enough property damage to give any insurance adjuster nightmares. Cars are as much characters in this movie as the actors themselves. Take, for example, the pristine 1972 Cadillac Sedan DeVille, a boat of a car that becomes a central figure in the movie's escalating destruction. Watching this beautiful machine go from showroom worthy to a battered mess feels almost sacrilegious, and yet you can't look away. In one scene, when Les and his friends arrive at Archie's Atomic, we see a 1955 Ford Thunderbird, a 1932 Ford V8, a 1978 Porsche 911, and my personal favourite, a 1969 Pontiac GTO, although it does make me sad to see what happens to it, even though we're not supposed to root for those guys. Oh, I almost forgot about the C4 Corvette from earlier in the movie, which would have been brand new at the time. And I simply must mention the gorgeous 1978 Ferrari 308 GTS, driven by Les whilst being chased by the maniacal school bus driver during his dream sequence. For years I couldn't quite place where I'd seen this guy before, until I looked him up. He played the manager of the Sedgwick Hotel in Ghostbusters. Did I mention explosions? This movie really is a vehicular buffet of 80s excess. The stunts, though not overly elaborate by today's standards, were an impressive feat for the time. There's an unforgettable scene where Les drives in reverse down a steep hill while narrowly avoiding catastrophe, a practical effect achieved by skilled stunt drivers and precise choreography. This wasn't a CGI-heavy era. What you see on screen required actual cars, gutsy professionals, and a touch of lunacy thrown in for good measure. And how's this for some precise parking? At its core, License to Drive isn't just about driving. It's about freedom, responsibility, and those quintessential growing pains of being a teenager. Les starts out as a typical self-centered high schooler, desperate to pass his driving test for all the wrong reasons, chiefly impressing Mercedes and living out his fantasies of independence. By the end, he's, sort of, learned to think beyond himself. The movie doesn't go too deep, this is an 80s comedy after all, but the underlying message about taking responsibility for your actions is clear, even if it's delivered with a wink and a smile. The film's depiction of American teen life in the late 80s is a fascinating contrast to today's driving culture. Back then, getting your license was a badge of freedom and independence. Today, with rideshare apps and parents who can track their kids with GPS, that desperation to drive feels almost quaint. Watching Les navigate these obstacles with no smartphone and no Google Maps underscores how much things have changed. No 80s movie is complete without a killer soundtrack, and License to Drive delivers in this department. The film features hits like Billy Ocean's Get Out of My Dreams, Get Into My Car, an anthem that may as well have been written for this movie, and The Breakfast Club's Drive My Car, a contemporary for the time reimagining of the Beatles' original version. These tracks, combined with the film's synth-heavy score, create a buoyant, high-energy vibe that matches the manic pace of the story. The music isn't just background noise, it actively propels the narrative, underscoring the drama and humour with every bass line and synth chord. Add to this a few Frank Sinatra classics such as Strangers in the Night, Saturday Night, and That's Life, and you have moments of sheer musical brilliance, which adds to the absurdity of the story. Let's be honest here. License to Drive is pure popcorn entertainment. It's light, it's silly, and it's unrelentingly fun. It's a movie that doesn't take itself too seriously, inviting viewers to enjoy the ride and laugh at the chaos. While some of its humour might feel dated, the two Corys' undeniable charisma, the absurdly fun car stunts, and the sheer 80s-ness of it all make it a joy to revisit. For anyone who remembers the thrill and terror of taking their first driving test, or who just wants to escape into an era when a driving licence meant everything, License to Drive is a movie worth getting behind the wheel for. I'm Stuart McLachlan, and as always, you can call me That Guy in the Firebird. Thanks for watching, and please, drive safely.
Buckle up, son. It's the real world out here.